It will stress your ability to get along with people that are your friends and coworkers. It will stress your belief in yourself. But ultimately, if you make your way through it, you will have something you're proud of, and you will have learned how to work with a team and how to make a great game. And that is the end of that talk. I'm going to move on to the next talk. If you have questions, please make sure to write them down so that you can remember them. Okay, I'm going to open up another document here. Where is the one I need?
Just I think, Bruce, you can go ahead with the other presentation as well. And if you have any questions, we can ask it at the end of the session.
Yep. Okay, so now I'm going to share the screen for my other talk. There we go. And let's start this one from the beginning. Okay, same intro screen, so I don't need to tell you about that. This is a talk about the game of expectations. And this is one of my favorite phrases because this is a game that is played in all walks of life, and it's really important for everyone to understand it, particularly in the field of game design. William Shakespeare said that expectation is at the root of all heartache. So, expectations. We are not judged. Well, actually, let me save that for the second part here. Let me give you an example of expectations. So let's suppose that we give Bruce $10, and you can convert that to whatever currency you want for money. But we give Lori $20. Now we have a third person over here. And what is George's expectation? Is he happy if he gets $10? I suspect he's not, because he saw Lori get $20. But now if we give Bruce $10 and we give Lori $5, now what would George's expectation be if you gave him $10? He'd most likely be happy. But in both of these examples, George got the exact same amount of money. The only thing that changed was his expectation. So we are not judged by audiences. So let's talk about fire. Fire is something that happens in video games a lot. And we all understand fire. We've all seen fire. We have life experiences that inform us about what fire means. So if you use fire in your game, which is a very common thing to use, you have to meet those life experiences at a certain level or your audiences won't accept it. Previous game experiences will also inform what people expect out of fire. Other games have used fire. It's a very common thing, as I've just said. So if you don't take that into account, what an audience expects fire to do from other games they've played, you're also going to fail the game of expectations. And most importantly, previous experiences in your game. You must be consistent with how you do something. If fire burns a player in one of the first scenes of your game, but doesn't burn them in others, but instead makes them get pushed back, the player is not going to know what to expect of fire the next time he sees it. Is it going to burn me? Is it going to push me back? And that leads to confusion, and that leads to a failure of the game of expectations. So expectations can apply to small design elements too. In Skyrim and in Oblivion and in most of our other games, you can search crates. Therefore, the player expects to be able to search all crates. Yet we ship the game with some crates you cannot search. We failed to meet expectations, which caused confusion. And we heard about it from our players. They would complain that, I don't know if I can search this crate or not, so I'm forced to move the cursor, move the mouse over all the crates just to see if maybe I can look inside this one or not. And we shouldn't have done that. We should have been consistent. And we could have done this in a variety of ways. We could have had certain shapes, sizes, colors of crates be ones that you can open, and others look different that you cannot. Some way to help the player not be confused. And now we're back to expecting pictures with every slide. So another example from Skyrim. You can damage barricades with weapons and spells, but most other static objects are invulnerable. Technically, we failed to meet player expectations here, because if you look at this image, you can see the walkway above doesn't really look intrinsically different than this barricade down below. They're both made out of wood. They both form a barrier, but I can damage one and I cannot damage the other. And so now we put the player once again into a situation where they have to try things every time just to see, is this something we can or cannot damage? We helped ourselves by putting a little red bar at the bottom. If you put the cursor over an object that can be damaged, you get to see that bar. If you don't see the bar, it can't be damaged. So we tried to help the player out a little bit that way. And we built a new expectation that you can destroy barricades, but only barricades. You can reset expectations. So the first time the player comes along and sees a barricade and he doesn't know he can damage it and then finds out he can't, his expectations are reset. And you have to be careful how you use that, because if you're constantly changing them, you're going to cause a problem. So all barricades in Skyrim can be damaged, and that is the expectation we reset after the first time that you encountered them. Of course, you want to avoid this, like I said. And here's a little comic that you can read for yourselves about expectations getting lower and lower, and that makes it really easy to meet them. You don't want to be in that situation where the player's expectations are so low that there's never any issue there, because they'll just won't be interested in your game. They will stop playing. Context, consistency, and player feedback will prevent this. Context, the barricades have the context of being in the Civil War quest line. Consistency, we always made it so the barricades could be damaged. Player feedback, that's the little bar. We gave you some way to know, oh yeah, okay, the game is telling me I can change, I can damage these, but I can't damage other things. And now I'm resetting your expectation for how the text in my presentation looks, because I've been consistent about going back to the blue cartoony font here. Let's look at the Assassin's Creed series. Context. If it looks like I can climb it, I can. They did an amazing job of that. Anything that looks like I should be able to climb it, I actually can climb. So now I don't have any questions as I wander around the world. Looks like I can climb it, I can climb it. Consistency. They were highly consistent. I can climb everything. And player feedback. They don't give any feedback for climbing. So that's a stroke mark against them on that. However, they were so good at context and so good at consistency that I'm not going to ding them on that, because I never had any questions about what I could climb in the Assassin's Creed series. They did, however, give feedback for assassinations. They would outline targets that could be assassinated. And this was having to make up for consistency. Some actors could not be assassinated. That would be a lack of consistency. There were some context situations where it looked like I should be able to assassinate somebody, but I couldn't. But by providing the player feedback, they tried to make up for that. So when do we set or reset expectations? When you're looking at your game, you need to shine a light on what you can do, not on what you can't. And this also goes true, it's also true for the player. Shine the light on what the player can do, not on what he can't. Focus on the most important parts of your game. There are things that matter, and there are things that you can control. And the intersection of those two, that's where you focus your game. That's where you focus on setting your expectations. These are important things that I actually can control. Now, let's talk about random numbers in the game of expectation. Now, I'm a mathematician by trade. That's what my education is. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics, and that's what I've spent most of my career doing, is working with mathematics. So I understand random numbers at a fairly deep level, but that's not true for everybody. Let's talk about Markov. Andrei Markov was a 19th century mathematician responsible for Markov chains. And no, you don't need to know about Markov chains. But he postulated that in simple terms, the next random number you encounter is independent of the previous random number. So for example, if I flip a coin 10 times and it comes up heads each time, what are the odds it will come up tails on the 11th time? Anyone who understands Markov, who has experience with random numbers, know that the answer is 50-50, that all those previous 10 coin flips did not change what the chances were on the 11th. But people who are not mathematically savvy will not feel that. They will either tell themselves if it came up heads 10 times, well, it's going to come up heads again the 11th, or they'll alternately tell themselves the story that it's due to come up tails. And you hear people talk about that in gambling all the time. It's due to hit. And that's fooling yourself about the nature of random numbers. So, expectations in random numbers. Most people think that the chances are higher than 50-50 when they're not. They have an expectation. So many heads in a row are flipped, it must be due to come up tails, or the reverse. And most people think random events should work more like a deck of cards than like a die or a coin flip. They don't really want true random numbers. And this is important for video games. When it doesn't work that way, it breaks their expectation. In coin flips, they expect heads, then tails, then heads, then tails, and heads, then tails, or something like that. So, random numbers in scale. This is an actual problem with random numbers that we encountered in Oblivion. Random monsters were placed in locations, and sometimes they were easy, sometimes they were medium, and sometimes they were hard. And we just let the random numbers go on that. So in a map, that had 8 such markers, this seemed to work great for us. But when 1 million people played the game, it revealed a problem. For most players, they got some easy, some medium, some hard. But we started to get complaints that the map was either too hard or too easy. Why? And these people might rage quit because, oh, this game's just way too hard. Oh, this game's trivial. Why should I play it? The problem was that some people were getting all hard or all easy. So with 1 million players, with 7 or 8 encounters, let's use 7 in this example because that's the math I have up here, 450 people had all 7 encounters be hard. From their point of view, that happened 100% of the time because it happened to them. And the game was broken because the whole level was too hard. It didn't matter to them that it was just a fluke of random numbers. It didn't matter to them that most people got a mix of easy, medium, and hard. They got all hard, and this game sucked because of it. So it's not enough to say the odds of that happening are small. With a large enough sample size, it will happen. You will get the strange result. So random numbers that aren't random tend to be a better choice for a lot of video games. You have to pick and choose your battles here. You can't redefine random numbers for every situation. But we tend to prefer things that look more like a deck of cards, where we have all possibilities, but as we use them up, the other possibilities are the only things that are left. And so we end up seeing every card in the deck. We end up seeing every possibility before we recycle. So in Fallout 4, we had dialogue responses that were random. The NPCs would say random things, and they had a whole stack of things they could say were random. If we let it be totally random, they kept saying the same lines over and over, or at least it felt like that. So when we have a random stack of dialogue responses in Fallout 4, we required that each line be said once before resetting the whole list. We made it work like a deck of cards. So the player would hear a random response, and then he'd hear a different random response. And ultimately, he would hear the only random response that was left out of the set of choices we provided, and then it would reshuffle the deck. And this gave a much more satisfying result to the player. It appealed to his expectations that these random numbers ended up being random the way he perceived it, rather than the way mathematical systems would say. For the addiction system and Fallout 4, we used a different way. We started and then we kept increasing the overall chance each time you rolled. Because what happens when you have a 10% chance is you can literally never end up with that chance that you end up getting addicted to one of the chems. But by every time you try, we increase the chances. Eventually, it ends up being 100%, and we got something that felt better. We also ended up fixing the problem of load save. Players couldn't save the game, try their chem, and then reload the game, hoping to get the better result, because it was tied to how many times they tried it and not to the actual roll itself. Now, I have here, I'm going to extend this a little bit with something about game of expectations in real life. And this is a very personal story. This is the story of how I got into the video game business. And this is where the game of expectations is about real life. I went to Beloit College, a very small college in Wisconsin, one of the states in the United States, in the Midwest. And that's where I got my degree in math. And in Wisconsin, in college, that they decided to ultimately replace. And just punch cards. And yes, I'm actually old enough. And they were replaced with an HP 3000. It was an unusual situation, but the college did upgrade. And over the summer, they hired me to, along with some other people, to make a bunch of to rebuild their accounting software package. in COBOL. Now, for any of you out there who are programmers, COBOL is an abysmal language. It's just absolutely horrible. You literally spell out math formulas you add by typing the word add. Not a great experience, but it was very common for business programming to use COBOL. It had some advantages. So I would spend 8 hours a day doing COBOL programming, being bored to tears, and then I would spend the next 8 hours making a game in a different language, BASIC as it turns out. And then I'd sleep and eat for the remaining 8 hours because there was nobody on campus. There was nothing to do. It was the summertime. And then when I got back in the fall, let me go back to the previous slide actually. When I got back in the fall, the games that I wrote were a big hit. Not because they are necessarily amazing, wonderful games, but games. The expectations were zero, and I exceeded them by providing anything at all. And one of the games that I made was a game called Dragons, which was a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon walk simulator, very much like the one you see on the screen here, where you wander around in these rooms built with pound signs for walls and make and fight monsters and get treasure. Well, it turns out that the folks at TSR who make Dungeons and Dragons were right down the street, about 45 minutes in an adjacent salesperson knowledge who made a game that looks all like the stuff you guys make. You should hire him. And so they interviewed me. And you can see this is pretty close to what my interview felt like at the time, with me sweating bullets, them asking a lot of questions. And ultimately, they gave me the job. And here's where the game of expectations just can't ever happen to anybody else in the world. But at the same time, the best way to get the job is to show you already can do the job, which is what I inadvertently did by making that game. I built the expectation that I wanted to make games. I made a game, and I met the expectation for the people at TSR, and they hired me. And these are the first professional gaming platforms I worked on, a TRS-80 and an Apple II Plus. So just to let you know how far video games have come, this is my start story. And these are the first two games that I made on the Apple II Plus. As you can see, you have a little 3D dungeon down here and very, very, very primitive art. And this is the team that worked on Skyrim. And if you look closely, you can see Todd Howard in there, and you can also find me. And that's the end of my talks. Thank you very much, and I will now open it up to questions for anyone who might have any questions. So let me unshare my screen here. There you go, and I'll turn it back over to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I think that was two really amazing, really interesting talks on two different topics. And I think our audience is really found it interesting, and it's fascinating for them. And I'm sure they have a lot of questions, and we'll be picking a little bit of them due to the time constraints. So starting off with the first one. We have one from Facebook. In Skyrim, almost every character which you encounter can be interacted with. Why did you decide to give the game such a level of depth?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there. Could you repeat the question for me?
Am I audible now?
You were audible, but I was missing like every fourth syllable, so it was hard to understand.
Yes, sure, I'll go. In Skyrim, almost every character which you encounter can be interacted with. Why did you decide to give the game such a level of depth?
This was something that I very much wanted to do. I wanted the game to feel immersive. I wanted it to feel like you were in a real place. And that meant that every character you run into, you should be able to interact with to make the whole thing feel real. On top of that, if you look at Skyrim, there aren't very many characters at any one time. The entire city of Windhelm or Whiterun has maybe 30 actors in it total. So with so few characters that we were able to display on screen, we wanted to make the most of them. And so we made you able to interact with every single one of them.
Okay, so the second one we have found from YouTube. That's in line with your first presentation, I think. How do you yourself go about trying to strike a balance between your own beliefs and what others say in terms of failing faster?
What was that last part of that sentence?
I'll repeat the entire
Beliefs
question
between
again.
what I believe and what?
How do you yourself go about trying to strike a balance between your own beliefs and what others say in terms of failing faster?
It can be a challenge. I am a fairly strong-willed person. I have a really strong belief in myself. So anytime somebody gives me a contrary opinion, one of the things I do is just shut up for a minute. Just don't say anything. Just let it sit there, think about it, and try to give weight to what they're saying. I also don't immediately start off with no or but with the first thing I say. I might ask them to explain what they're saying a little deeper so that I both have a chance to think about it more and give them a chance to try to explain in more depth what it is they're saying. And I always acknowledge when somebody else is right or has a good point. It's very, very easy to not give out credit. Credit is cheap. You know, hey, that was a great idea. It costs you nothing. You should say it every single time you can.
Yes, I think you answered the question well, and I think I completely agree with you on that regard. So we have another question. So we know that you worked on Dungeons and Dragons during your early days, and so we have a question: how did working on Dungeons and Dragons designing influence Skyrim?
Several ways. The principal vision for Skyrim was Todd Howard's, not mine. But one of the things that we shared is that Dungeons and Dragons formed the expectation for everyone out there for what a great video game should be. And we weren't the first people to do this. Lord British did it with his Ultima series long before the Elder Scrolls came along. But that really is at the foundation of what people expect from a fantasy role-playing game. Role-playing was popularized by the folks at Dungeons and Dragons. You even say it was most likely invented there. So it set our expectations. And my work there taught me how to build good stories and taught me how to work with the mechanics of balancing things like combat and loot and treasure and what that meant in the context of gaming. So I really owe most of my video game career to my experiences at TSR and making Dungeons and Dragons games.
Move on to our next question. What is the biggest challenge you foresee that those entered in the gaming industry have to face?
These days, it's become professionalized. When I entered gaming, I'm going to go back before video games. When I was first hired at TSR, well, I suppose technically they hired me to make a video game there. My boss used to like to say there were more people making a living as an astronaut than there were as game designers. Nobody knew how to do this stuff. There were no college courses in it or degrees in it. We were making it up as we were going along, figuring it out, making horrendous mistakes and having to fix them. But over the years, it's become professionalized. You now get degrees in all of this stuff. There's right and wrong ways to do it, best practices. And in order to get a job in the industry, you have to meet those professional criteria. Also, you are competing against way more people. I wasn't competing against hardly anybody when I got my first job. Pure luck of the draw. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I am the luckiest man you've ever met. I got my dream job because they came to me and said, would you like it? Nobody should wait around for that. Nobody should. But all of you have to meet those professional criteria. You have to rise to a level. You have to meet your employer's expectations at a higher level than I had to. And you are competing against way more people than I ever had to.
All right, Bruce. So I think we have someone from the audience who's been inspired by your two talks. So they have asked, if I want to become a game designer like you, like to go to the highest level, where should I start?
I always tell people who want to get into the industry, and this is true for almost any job, people who are looking to hire are working from fear. They are afraid they will hire the wrong person. They will spend a lot of money and a lot of time if they hire the wrong person. The thing you need to do is you need to help them get over their fear. The best way to do that, show them you can do the job. And that's what I did without realizing it by making games at my college. I didn't know I was doing that, but it turns out I was. I allayed their fear. I made a game and I showed, said, here, look, I did this. You can trust me. You can hire me. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. The best way, which is not available to someone who's first getting into the game industry, is to have worked someplace else. This is why people who have already done the job have an advantage. They've proven they can do it in the setting that it needs to be done in. Second way, prove you can do the job not in a setting that has been, that they're going to be doing it in. This is where a college degree can come in, because if you get that degree, you have helped them become a little less fearful. Oh, he's got this degree. He knows something. He knows what he is doing. But ultimately, make something. Your school projects, the things that you can do, and the tools that a lot of developers put out there for you to make mods or add-ins with. These demonstrate the best way, in the best way, that you can do this job. You want to work at Bethesda Softworks, make something in one of their mod tools, in their creation kits. That's how you're going to do it. Have that degree. Show off an amazing portfolio. Show off something in the creation tool that is an amazing quest or has an amazing level to it. That's how you're going to show them you can do the job, is by doing the job.
Thank you, Bruce. I think that was a really valuable answer to the person who asked that question. So that's it from the Q&A. Thank you, delegates, for your thoughtful questions. So finally, we have a question from Ayd. Any other thoughts you would like to share with our audience, and yes, anything about what we are doing as about Creative Circuit, where we try to bring out, highlight and inspire backstage heroes like yourself?
I think these kinds of conferences are invaluable. It's very easy to, if you're in a college course or a college degree program, which I assume many people watching this are, to end up in what we call an ivory tower, end up in a place where you're not seeing the real world, you're not having the real experiences, but you're close to them. And to be able to pull professionals like myself in to try and give just a small glimpse into some of the differences between something that's happening in an academic environment and something that's happening in a real environment is very valuable. Even small things like show you can make games in order to prove to your employer that you can make games. That's something that may not come to you from your professors, because many of them may or may not have actually worked in a professional environment. You know, small things like the games of expectations and working at Fail Faster. Now, most of you, I'm hoping, have heard of the Fail Faster concept. That's pretty much throughout all curriculums right now. But those are invaluable things to get the experience from people who are in the profession, and I hope Creative Circuit continues to do that in future years.
Thank you very much for that comment, Bruce. So with that, we wrap up the session and the day with Bruce Nesmith. Thanks a lot, Bruce, for inspiring our delegates to stand out of the box. You literally shared.
It's been a pleasure.
Shall I go on? You literally shared everything we need. Along with you, we wish the delegates to develop a whole different universe just for yourself.
You're most welcome.
To our audience, we'll see you tomorrow for our final virtual session for Creative Circuit 3.0, where we'll be having the Telegramma crew of Sudhu and Kalu joining us at 9:30 a.m. Think big, dream big, and achieve big. This is Indeepa signing off from the second day of Creative Circuit 3.2. Have a good night.
යව්වනේ පපියන චමත්කාරය